Hello everyone, today we review the 22 Netflix All Quiet or Nothing New on the Western Front from the homonymous work of Eric Maria Remarque. And all of you will say, oh my god, Schwerpunkt, you turn to movie reviews, what happened to you, are you sick, whatever. Independently from any personal issue, I decided to take a look at this for very specific reasons that are partially connected with the channel, of course. Everything began back in last winter, I think, just after this thing came out. I don't know whether you know them, I don't remember. I don't really know anything about this movie except having watched it, which I rigorously did for free because otherwise I've never watched it in the first place. And you're right, by a degree, I don't actually like to do this. I will explain better why I've gotten into it. In spite, I say it here and there, cinema making an important part of my interests, right, since childhood. So there would be a space for that also on Schwerpunkt. I did think about reviewing particularly military movies, right, given that I think that's the only sense it would make for this channel, except from other kind of broadly speaking historical ones. But whenever I spoke about in fact movies in general, I didn't express myself favorably in the sense that I always discourage anyone who is seeking for historical education or accuracy to try to find this in any form of art, right? Art is another thing, right? It can be terrible in itself. Always evaluate the artistic quality per se, and don't look just for the historical accuracy, and especially don't think that at this point, like anyone but yourself, by studying history in a serious way, can provide you any useful insight about history just per se, right? So there will be wide space in this video for my usual ranting about how we approach, in this case, cinema, and how this also has, in my opinion, dramatically sunk, right, in the last 20 years. I think the last true moment of great movie age, when movies were made properly, still the old way, at least with the old purpose of remaining iconic and making, in fact, an era on their own and being remembered, whatever, was the early 2000s. Right after that, this has in part to do with social media, and we will explain this also in the video. You see why there is a lot actually to extrapolate, even just from a movie in itself, that can be legitimately like an interest, especially for movie critics and so on. But definitely impacts, say, educationally, the way we look at history, or better, diseducationally at this point. Today's video started, as I was saying before, not much from this movie per se, but the say my encounter with a tidal wave of positive criticism that was, of course, shot from every side from YouTube. Even if I didn't care, practically, they still don't, right? Or at least I care about that enough for keeping my content somehow straight in the direction of let's talk history, let's not even stop watching the critics, right? There is nothing wrong in watching the movie or watching this specific movie. If you want to watch it. I will tell my own here. The problem that is what really impressed me is, again, the overwhelmingly positive reviews that this movie got, and again, especially this sort of collective excitement about it, right? There have been good movies, in my opinion, that have come out of the incredibly low standards also in the last decades, right? So it's not a total desert out there. Also, say, war themed, and I could make some examples of that I evaluate, again, first and foremost from an artistic point of view, because that's what I care about fundamentally whenever I watch a movie or read a book or whatever. Of course, the more the setting rings in a sensible way. I want to say, again, particularly historically accurate way, but something that makes sense, right? I'm happy about that. This is the reason why, for example, I don't like fantasy movies, and why I'm horrified enough as a medievalist to realize that most people get into the Middle Ages in the sense that actually, from what they really do is getting in medievalism. It's just they don't know the difference between the two things. Derives from a very sad bombardment, starting from at least the movie rendition of The Lord of the Rings, all this stuff, and I am pretty dissatisfied with that, because you think that's a phase. Instead, you discover that there are actual people that live, even without knowing that, still within that kind of mindset, and keep approaching reality, actual reality, so including the historical one, through patterns that do not quite make sense. You also know that I am fundamentally a traditionalist channel, but that this word means something that normally goes far beyond what people, in fact, even think about tradition really being, right? So I also confess, of course, that I have my own chthonic curiosities, that I'm, of course, attracted by the arts, and because I believe they can be a useful. That's the same reason why I make YouTube videos, after all, right? I'm not sure whether my videos are a work of art, but I think that catching people's attention with pictures, for example, which, like with children, which turns suspiciously, out to be quite effective, right? By guys I can appreciate from, the way I handle thumbnails and just the content I upload, can, again, be like a bait for delivering something more substantial and fundamentally that requires intelligent and, cultivating yourself and hard work to really get down to the thing. That's why I also am, generally speaking, insensitive to any kind of ads of baits, in fact, because I know they are that. And sometimes I say, well, but maybe there is, like, even that you don't know, at least something behind that. So every once in a while I get curious and I watch stuff, and so on. And there are deeper reasons, as you will understand in this case, because I watched movie review that at least I think is more reliable, especially if it's short and compact, which definitely this video is not going to be. It's just also an experiment for further ones if you're interested in it, because there will be interesting points to make about at least mostly the mistakes of cinema regarding history, but in a way that gets beyond the technicality of it and mostly the moral dimension of, which is the artistic one, in fact, rather than really the historical one. There is an interesting boundary there that can overlap as well. So we'll try to make clarity nowadays. But I don't remember even who the author of this review was. It was on YouTube, and the title was something. I wouldn't have problems. Like, I don't think it's even worth mentioning that. The truth is that I would like to make a video response to that video at some point. Something have been toying with from since then, right? Because it consistently triggered me, because it was probably the most morally despicable review that I ever heard of a movie, and it was cheered by millions of people, also with a superficiality and just an incompetence, even in the same movie criticism, fundamental, not just even in the moral implication, were atrocious in it. But again, properly the shallowness of the whole thing, which sounded something like the great lie, the usual old lie, how anti-war movies did something, which basically got down. It was, in fact, reviewing this, this All Quiet on the Western Front from 2022, and going as far as saying basically that fighting every war is immoral, and that, after all, making complete moral relativism by saying, after all, Hitler was a good person if it hadn't been for the Holocaust, right? Those kind of, of perspective, but set by, again, a kid. Could be 10 years younger than me, and we all know that you can't say many stupid things and getting away with that, especially at that age. But that, again, I got dramatically impressed with the millions of reactions that got positively, and nobody actually giving a damn about that, right? Which is a serious problem. And I will probably make a video response, especially depending on how this video particularly goes. Because I watched the movie. It's like 2 hours and a half. It's perhaps too long, right? I don't like Netflix for the simple reason that I think it has increased this tendency in making this kind of ever fundamentally independently from this movie that probably also cost an important amount, but this, in fact, artistically cheaper and immediately, say, fastly consumable movies that you're supposed just to watch one after the other and unavoidably forgetting about, right? So at least when I watch something, I tend to want, at least I make a selection aimed at distinguishing in advance something that is worth watching and worth my time and all, right? Because, as you know, I have a pretty strict timetable in spite of my rambles that are actually part of the whole thing and that they serve to deliver the ultimate point, right? This movie interested me fundamentally because the reviews were pointed out, right? And I knew it was a bait and or an overstatement of the about the accuracy of the World War I's horrors rendition cinematographically. So the idea that this was, if not a good, let's say, military history, but at least a good war movie of some sort. And of course, I was pretty skeptical about that. And of course, I'm right to be skeptical because I can't say right off the bat that this was just like a bad movie that you don't want to watch, that is so bad, etc. But again, in something like a movie, and especially one of this, say, of the modest caliber it has, but again, considering the context in our age and the aforementioned way we consume movies, at least did make an effort. That is something that has always surprised me, especially in the last decades in cinematography, that you spend an important amount of money for depicting something that could be, in a very simple way, more artistically effective and morally impacting and kind of memorable, let's put it this way, for people to go back in time and say, you remember, it was the years of that movie that after all told me something that I want to go back watching, right? And of course, I'm interested in warfare, even though I'm just a modest medievalist. I made videos about World War I, and I plan actually doing more of them in the future, because World War I, as I've already been vocal about, is one of those fields, in fact, which one of those historical topics that have been unfortunately so great and impacting and thus memorable and somehow close enough in time for the masses to have disastrously enough an opinion on it that is irreversibly wrong, right? So every time you talk about World War I, you basically have always to reteach everyone what World War I actually was, politically, strategically, because the basic person's understanding of World War I is there were a bunch of crazy, bloodthirsty, alienated motherfuckers at the top smoking cigars and eating pastries that decided that millions and millions of people had to go dying, and these poor martyrs died for nothing, and they were without any fault, and basically it was just a senseless madness, and there was no point of fighting this war, or it didn't have any historical context or proper causes that should be able to, in fact, to correctly contextualize in that background. And it's very easy for, again, the masses to make emotionalism in moral relativism. So any movie that fundamentally depicts the horrors of World War I, without, of course, even entering in any political or strategic issue, is easily appreciable because people, let's be honest, we want to see people gunned down by machine guns and, exploding with shells and see, oh my god, the guy shot the other and all this stuff, and because it's somehow spectacular. Nothing really changed from the past. Humans are attracted to these things, and it's not even a bad thing per se. Just you should step to a higher level of rationale and and understanding a method and science, and understanding also, in fact, why wars were fought. Besides that, there's been naturally, because I'm also a kid of these generations, fundamentally, this kind of overwhelming, hyper-pumped kind of tendency of seeing history through essentially what you learn from video games, FPS especially. I mean, think about video games like Battlefield 1, and so for the 100 year anniversary of World War I, it was a bit of reinjection in this sense. Oh my god, this thing existed. Of course, the kids that play these games nowadays from latest generations are very, very distanced from World War I, not just generationally, but also culturally, mentally. Like, properly, we see that from stats, right? Nobody has a clue of what even things like that happened 40 years ago really at the generational rate that we didn't think it could even be possible, right? If you had asked a few decades ago, right? I was born essentially how many years? Like more than 70 years after World War I. I had grandparents that were born when before World War I, except one, and fundamentally I had a family memory and kind of a broader historical awareness from my family, from school, and from movies too, from literature, including remark about what World War I really was. Right nowadays, a kid. This is valid also for World War II, right? Even for very more recent events, it could be the Vietnam War, the Gulf War. They don't have a clue of what properly the entire concept of history is, right? We have managed in flattening relativistically and materialistically historical knowledge on the base on radical subjectivism, which means that at best your kids will learn from World War I just from the type of soldiers, classes, and national factions they can pick on video games, and still believing that World War I was fought by some dumb people that didn't know that the soldiers would stop in front of trenches, and they repeated that over and over and over again because they were dumb or crazy or whatever. I mean, it's just, it can be mentally deficitary as an idea, just of their parents thinking that, 18th century linear warfare was stupid because infantry was just walking compactly in front of the enemy, getting shot like that, and so how dumb you can be. I mean, we must, if we want to be honest with ourselves, we must face that we live in a world where the average person actually believes these things, right? They are more likely to believe these things than believing actual history in the first place, in fact, ipso facto, but basically any other moral or scientific principle, right? It doesn't take really much to understand World War I politics and strategy, just as it doesn't take much to understand 18th century linear tactics, right? But that's the measure of mental deficit of average people that vote, that drive cars, that raise children, and beyond. So just stay warned about this. Naturally, and fortunately, we still live in a civilizational hierarchy, so that the competent people at the top know how things work. But what I mean really is, just doesn't take to be a competent person at all, right? And I that I say this all the time. I'm a PhD in military history, and I never tell you it takes really to arrive here to be able to say who knows what, right? There is always a trick behind it, but at least, yes, in this case, we should look at our hierarchies, because in our field of specialty we know things, but literally these are concepts that you can't learn in school, right? If you're not neurocognitively able to understand these concepts in, say, by high school, there may be something severely wrong with your mental status, right? And I'm not kidding, right? And mentally, I mean, even such levels of ignorance that become dangerous for you existing as a human being, right? For yourself primarily, but also, and unfortunately, also for other people. So just transpose this in terms of political choices, if you don't understand that, how you can understand what's happening in the world? That's a very interesting question, but we see this being repeated over and over and over again. That's why I would like to make that video response about that kind of the only, by the way, movie review, and just how statistically, likely was it to hear those atrocities really spoken there is just by itself, in my opinion, making the point. So about this movie, first of all, my attitude with movies is they should get somewhere, right? If there is a very stupid comical movie that is cheaply vulgar, whatever, as long as it is expected to be that, it can't be a masterpiece if it succeeds in its genre, right? So whenever I watch a movie, I always pose myself this question: to which level of development, of intelligence is this movie supposed to reach, where to go, what its potential, what is that? Of course, you have to learn that through watching the movie itself, because it's without that you can't even actually frame the movie within that register that it has, and so you can't properly evaluate what potential it had to develop a certain the narration, the plot, whether the setting was kind of suitable for that, all what you could appreciate again about the artistic quality of this whole. So I can't say that this was like a bad movie. Like you watch it, oh my god, I don't like it. Right? It's objectively plenty of stupid, cheap movies that basically want just to imitate Saving Private Ryan ever since that came out, failing with a very scarce budget and always repeating the same cliches, the same FPS maps, settings, looking only at those nationalities, because if you don't focus on those nationalities, nobody watches that. If it doesn't look like, again, that input you got only not from history books but from video games, people are not going to watch that. That's in many ways how the cinematographic industry has failed, right? By basically using the masses' tastes as a sort of superstition, dictating them what movies to make in the hope that they would get views, like you search for views like on a YouTube video, right? Of course, they try to make money the way they see fit, but I think the artistic quality has radically collapsed, and the proclivity of, again, the average fourth estater to look at these movies and say, no, it's good because, I don't know, it talks about my country, for example. And so I also exist, this kind of national narcissism for which you are a complete disgrace for, of course, wherever you come from, but you still have to think that there is something about your nation can save you individually. No, it can't, right? If you are a disgusting human being, you remain a disgusting human being, independently where you come from, and frankly, given any world's national average, there is nothing but to be ashamed from being from any country. So if you really want to actually to do something positive about that, just be a better person. And don't become, again, a weakly, follower just behind a figurine, behind a piece of dirt, or just a flag, but whose history, by the way, you know nothing about in the first place. Because, of course, most people do not have the palest idea of what the history of their own country has ever been about, nor they're going to fix that in their lifetime. So this movie had probably some pretense of some sort, meaning that it was probably, I didn't check anything about that. And I would like also to stay away from the comparison with Remarque's book, because I believe that it's not so important. I mean, there are movies sometimes that are even better than books. It doesn't happen often. It's most obviously the way around normally. But again, I always look at the thing for what it tells, just as a piece of art, and what I may be knowing about whatever in my life and how it resonates with me, right? So there has been a tendency, of course, to look at World War I again, and again, I was looking for mostly for how the hype around this movie really was, and the critiques. The first thing I imagine is that it would be particularly impactful from a terms of horror, of trench warfare point of view, not necessarily in a military historically accurate way, but just in a way that would probably impact you again psychologically, gross you out, or some really making you feel the anxiety, right, of the theater, of the setting, right. This were the very last months of World War I. Basically, the German front was collapsing. So it's a moment in which, as you know, just dissecting, you imagine all, especially the political turmoil behind this. I knew, of course, that the book was not specifically about it, but when I think of a movie and how I would make it, I would always point at this bigger thing that is a sort of zeitgeist or properly a spirit of a history that at that point passes through the fact that the central empires were collapsing, and there were essentially, I don't know, mutinies of the sailors of the German Navy mutinying, wanting to establish Soviets in Germany. All the dramatic situation that happened, that opened later to very fierce political infighting, the grave situation of Germany after the war, the Freikorps, the nationalists and the communists, and so on. So things that I would like also to discuss, by the way, in some video, because, for example, the Freikorps history is quite fascinating in its connection also with War I's combatism and veterans, and so on. So considering the setting, I would be thinking it's something like, so that dark, right? Doesn't matter how poetically unpoetical remarks kind of rendition of this setting could be, I would imagine something pretty heavy, especially having come from an era in movie making that was especially highlighting that level of brutality, especially connected with World War II. Because let's be honest, this movie came out as just like World War I, but still as a pretext to show a bit like the German side of the story. We'll talk about that later, right? I don't think it's such an important topic, but it's still meaningful for our times. There is not much of a sort of Germanophilia here, or kind of German propaganda, or let's say reevaluate what you say just the Germans per se were going. This is a loosely based movie on the book. So there are changes, significantly enough. By the way, I will spoiler dramatically, so if you want to watch this after you watched the movie yourself, it's better, right? But I'm not even going to dwell too much into the minutiae, let's say, of the plot. I will not even make a dramatic character analysis, because I believe there isn't a great depth in there. That in fact is the greatest problem that has been pointed out in the reviews, right? That there has been an incredibly positive reception to this movie that at least I don't understand, or at least I wish I didn't understand the reason why. But meaningful enough, in Germany, there has been a much greater criticism to it, because the sense of emotional intimacy from the book, but generally speaking also in the way this story is being told, I think is pretty disappointing, if not reckless, in fact. And I think that the fact that especially Germany, the German audience, expressed this sense of almost of discomfort because of this missed opportunity to depict properly the depths of the psychological drama of that specific setting, and all the very big political implications behind that is the main problem with this movie. It's too relatively flat, right? About the actual setting, the political implications, the connection with violence, and even just in the fact that there is not apparently much of a characterial development throughout the movie. That it doesn't seem that nobody cared about. But we will see it even in, of course, reconstructing combat accurately, but that's not the main deal. In fact, showing how these kids changed into the kind of almost soulless characters that in the book emerged to the point of wanting literally to get over with, right? And there is a very big difference with the book as far, especially as the ending, where the main character dies in combat, where regarding the acceptation of life, right, and death per se, or the willing to leave or not, which is really what the book went down to. So I think that in general, regarding the main line, the main plot, this movie failed clamorously, or at least they wanted probably to tell a story using the book as basing themselves on the book, but without actually making even the effort of caring so much about not the adherence to the book. Again, any difference from that would be great, because again, I think there are beautiful movies that were so because they were different, more and bolder and more poignant than the original work. Of course, as a military historian, I look at some storytelling based on on the phases of combat, for example, that is illustrated in this movie. I can't say it is really it's a war movie in a polymological sense. Of course, it is set in a war, in trench warfare, but you can't even properly say that this is that this renders the gruesome pace and violence of even what the book was describing. By the way, from a World War I veteran, because Remarque fought exactly within this context. So the book is somehow autobiographical because, as we'll see now, he had been wounded in combat, and when he healed, he was sent back to the front line in October 1918, right? And he was lucky, of course, to make it out from the German side in that context. So there's been a second-class movie that was before this Quiet on the Western Front, 22-1, was exactly about this. It was like, if I don't remember, it was very famous on YouTube. It circulated, like it was about the last hours of the war, showing some, I don't know, the various sides of the front, the stories of these people that died in the very last hours. So sparking that sense of kind of at least injustice, like we're dying at the very last, when they could have instead survived. They would have had much higher chance to survive the same war at that point. So that's also at least, given the book is based at least in part on that very last November 1918. I can understand it, but one thing, if you really wanted to make it as deep, right, as that, and making it even more moving, because I don't think it's particularly moving. It makes you feel bad for the characters in the end, not just because they all die, but because, of course, there is this thing of the very last battle, which is not actually part of the book. Again, it's something different. So they evidently wanted to move it towards the sense of, oh my God, why? Injustice, right? And they did it by further adding something, in fact, that I'm not very fond of, regarding whose fault was this, etc. Meaningfully enough, again, reactions to this movie. There's this new kind of YouTube video. Let's film myself while I watch the movie and let's express the emotion. I mean, just think of how lowly we have fallen in terms of emotionalism, of lack of backbone. Like, there are people who are willing to spend their own time watching other people watching a movie and looking at the reactions that they make, right? Without even watching the movie. That's probably the lowest kind of activity. I don't know. Sorry if I laugh, but objectively, that's so terrifying that I prefer laughing than crying at this point. I heard people that say, "Oh my God, I watched this movie and I cried," including that guy that was making the sense that, finding every war is wrong for not even explaining why politics exist and why wars are fought in the first place. How can you cry with this movie? I mean, I don't know. First of all, you don't really get that much attached to the characters, telling the truth, right? Again, because the in-depth connection with them is particularly low, right? There is another, we'll talk about it later, but the 1917 movie that I also don't excessively like, but it was dramatically better than this in terms of just even remaining attached, in that case mostly literally with the camera to the characters, but also seeing their very subtle development within, especially the main one, from the beginning to the end. There was a lot of symbolism, etc. This one was dramatically flat as far as that was concerned. The way they could have done this more pathetic, more dramatic, more tragic would have been also sticking to Remarque's plot as far as the protagonist, Paul Boima, is just the average Saxon kid, right? Goes to war, right? Because he's been, at least in the book, somehow indoctrinated, galvanized, excited by his school teacher, who was a nationalist and said it was so great to go fight in the war, except he wouldn't, even as an adult, volunteer for that, but he's drafted in the book and he ends up of course, in the same unit, and he's blasted by these kids at that point. So that alone, and all that kind of setting, like looking at this kid for what he was also before the war and what he is later, is missing, right? The movie begins with the first scene. We'll talk about it now because it's in the combat situation. It's a random one, doesn't have anything to do with the characters. They are other people. But eventually it goes to this kid just going with his peers to enlist. Right. All this, again, in a context that I think is much later than also the book itself, because I think this kid stayed there for like 2 years, if I remember correctly, in the war. I can't be wrong. In any case, here you should have, while it's true that in the book there is a staunch contrast between the trenches, of course, and home that doesn't change very much, but you could sense that they are the greater anxiety of Germany, and so these expectations, these lies that were told about the war, marching on Paris at that point in 2 weeks, the entire thing that after the empire screwed up on the Marne in 1914, it was mostly just attempting to salvage, a good peace of some sort without the country getting invaded, but they had fundamentally screwed up with the Schlieffen plan enough to render the situation very complicated, and there is definitely a responsibility there, as we all know historically. I will not descend in that. The German government and how they went on with this, but there is much more it gets down to the average people that is not really showed in this movie specifically, and that instead Remarque captured beautifully, and that also is a bit the most interesting thing of the war, right? Why are you there? Why are you fighting the war? Which in the movie is not basically touched as a topic, if not marginally, and I will explain how. So these kids just enlist, and then they immediately leave for the front. I mean, they don't even show, they get to the front, actually. They don't even show them leaving their families. At the beginning, actually, the protagonist even makes a fake signature of his father to be enlisted, something, and there is none of the family in all of this, right? It would have been heartbreaking to see what properly the reaction. There's all the story in the book, the mother dies, there's this connection with the father too that doesn't understand the war because he's basically also, he doesn't get what his son went through, and so on. But all that sense of, of course, a more sentimental side that could elevate the death of these kids, I think could have been very well represented at that point. There is a scene at the beginning in which they go as far as showing kind of the darkest side of say, not maybe of the movie, but the most funereal one, which frankly doesn't impress, right? It's very short, doesn't show anything in particular. It is to say that they pick this, when these kids are killed, these were random soldiers in combat, they stripped them of their uniforms, then they buried them, and these uniforms went back home. And there are, say, nice scenes, at least the few things they recreated, right? Some of them, of course, are historical, more of that later. They simply resew the uniforms, and even the name of the guy to whom they belonged remained at the moment in which these uniforms were given to the new enlisted, including the protagonist at some point, and says, well, wait, this is not mine. And the recruiter says, okay, well, don't mind. It takes away the tag on the uniform, and it shows how these kids essentially were getting into the carnage. But it's not so powerful, right? Even when, banally speaking, I say maybe I grew desensitized to violence and death, because I've seen, at least not directly in life, but during my work, pretty gruesome, terrifying things. And, even something that can be just of common knowledge, if you have seen a corpse, you know how pale and empty that looks. I mean, it's white, but very, very white. If you make a scene in which these kids are stripped of their uniforms and brought into coffins, next to coffins, being to bury them, you look at this kid, it doesn't even look white. You can see he's an alive guy that is not even meant to look like a corpse, and it's not shocking. If you wanted to shock people about this movie, looking at the gruesome aspect of warfare, you simply don't. You put that layer of terrifying outlook on the whole picture, right? 1917 had pretty good representation of very horrifying things. The composition, very, in various environments in water, you could see pretty bad stuff that objectively was at least impressive, in the sense that in a movie they hadn't quite showed that. Here, if you really, this scene was terrifying, everybody cried, I didn't feel anything watching that scene. It's just a dumb movie, right? It doesn't make you feel the sense of the massacre, of the amount of these kids. They were, young kids that came from people that fundamentally believed in the same things for which they were sent to the front, getting killed, including themselves, and that were part, again, of a game that may have been bigger than them, but they contributed making it happen from all sides. So where's all that, right? There's not even also the music here was used in the movie, generally speaking, is particular because it's a sort of techno, almost a rock kind of bam 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 when they advance towards the front, but it happens every once in a while, and then there's just a soft, classical music towards the end, in a moment in which they had learned that the war was over, that is meant to symbolize, look, everything here was a senseless mess, and so even the music basically did not exist, and whatever existed was something relatively rough. But even the roughness of that music, for example, doesn't match what you see in screen. And the distinct impression I got from this movie is that they designed it just for essentially kids, right? They wanted this movie to be watched by young people, the same ones that would play Battlefield 1, that want to get exalted, looking, oh my god, this is a movie about World War the First. It's so cool, right? Let's go watch it, because I don't know if we are the ones who understand World War the First better because we watched this movie. And so they couldn't make it too overwhelmingly violent. There are pretty violent scenes, but I mean, it's because what the characters are doing is very violent, but it's not meant to impact you dramatically, right? There are, again, scenes, and if you look at 1917, it's properly scary in some instances. In the way people die, I don't know, in movies like Saving Private Ryan, is dramatic, is physical, is properly, there is a physiological representation of how a person properly passes away in gruesome combat circumstances that really you will remember, because it's maybe it's not even 100% accurate, but it doesn't have that chip softer filter to be kind of more acceptable, because otherwise it would be too violent, right? So the first, oh my god, this movie represents the horrors of World War I. There are so many movies that represent the horrors of World War I, and definitely this doesn't more than much, right? Especially considering that there are multiple scenes of combat, so you would expect to see to have that sense of heaviness. This movie shows pretty horrifying deaths without making you feel particularly impressed with them. You have people that stab themselves in the neck because they think they're done for. They were shot to death. Basically, there are people run over by tanks. There are people exploding, people being burned alive and stabbed with bayonets and shot, like all this kind of things, right? But in the way they're represented, there are those kind of maybe not family friendly movie at the ultimate level. It's just something that everybody can watch, right? And again, emotionally speaking, didn't hit pretty much anywhere. I mean, there were the most emotional scenes were fundamentally the non-combat ones, after all. And in a sense, it can't be correct, because everybody knows naturally that in those circumstances, when they went over the top, it was the best time for them, because in spite of the risk of that, it was then, right? There was nothing to wait for anymore, because it was the anxiety of the waiting that worn them out, that ate them from the inside. It's a very interesting psychological aspect that, by the way, in this movie is not represented. So they lost a bit like the ABC, I would say, that if they wanted to, you see, this doesn't cost anything. You may just hire a psychologist or a war veteran or something, right, to tell you exactly, more or less at least, how certain sense also of camaraderie works like, right? This is terrible in my opinion, because in the movie, in the book, there is this sense, like in the movie, of course, that the various comrades, or the protagonist friends in the unit all died. These were all kids from the same town, and in the book there is a dramatic, development out of that. Actually, out of the last death, the protagonist at some point says, "Okay, I don't want to live anymore. I don't care anymore." Here in the movie, till the end, the guy is exhausted, but he still kind of accepts the fact he has to fight. In fact, what I don't like very much of this is also that when straight at the beginning, they as soon as they're recruited, they're sent to the front, and they're immediately faced with this, say, unheroic looking sign of war. They had to empty the trench, the water from in the trench with their helmets under the same rain, which looks like a bit emptying the sea with a bucket, and that is how it's showed. And then immediately the same night they're bombarded, and the guy, the protagonist, gets shot in the helmet the first night. I mean, immediately. Right, which is also a bit ridiculous, right? They're fixated a bit with the headshots, this lack of shots that, again, can happen, not only if you have seen other 500 shots of what this is more likely to be or not. Okay, a sniper shot would try to catch that, but, if you want to show what warfare is in its terrifying scale, in fact, you should look at a more comprehensive scene dimension, when you can also feel the idea that there were literally millions of people there. Mobilized. This sense you do not get, right? you can sense a better feeling, even from much smaller and kind of worse even movies, right? There was one on the Rise of Hitler. There's the scene of World War the First. It was from like 10 years ago. At least that trench segment is regarding the political tension, the whole thing. It was kind of even more realistic in the characters, etc. What is showed here. Here they wanted, again, to make a movie for a kid showing, yes, we go to war. Because, by the way, there is not much indoctrination even that you see before that. You see a nice German town where these kids arrive. Everything is fundamentally nice on the outside. There's nothing particularly wrong. There's just the guy, I think, the town hall that excites these kids, saying, there's nothing. Of course, the same things of nationalism. There's nothing, no greater honor than dying for Germany, for the Kaiser, for God, all this kind of thing. But it's not like a charismatic thing. It's just a brief section, and then they're immediately sent to war. And what is meant to make the shock effect is just, these few things, and basically a bombardment that is incredibly plain, right? It's also somehow, unrealistic in the measure in which, of course, the first guy that panics and gets out of the refuge in the trenches explodes just in front of the front door, and it's very poorly made. And generally speaking, if a bomb, an artillery shell exploded, there would have been a total mess. And makes you say, really, how likely is that? Understand that war is hell, but it can be hell in so many other ways. I mean, you could have just showed the eyes of the soldiers when the kids got there, right? Or, I don't know, something else. Like, you don't have to force oh my god, this is so random, and it exactly happens the worst that you can imagine in the very first second in which they step there, because if that's the only thing that it turns out that you're going to show, it's not going to work, right? Also basically this refuge crumbles, and the protagonist wakes up basically perfectly under a niche that nobody understands, based on looking at the disposition of the people inside of it when the thing crumbled, how he got up there and everything was carved perfectly with blanks just over him, right? It doesn't look realistic even as a collapse. There again, other cheap short movies that represented a decent collapse of some soldiers being buried into a trench without being so again unrealistic in at least given the set of circumstances. Plus, I would say I understand they wanted to make this shock effect, and it failed, just psychologically you watch it. But also the fact that these kids, the first day, get immediately bombed, okay, I can even conceive it. But then they're pulled out of the trench, nobody even cleans their face, right? These are exactly the kids from school. They are the babies, right? There are some grizzled veterans. There should be an organization, a sense of camaraderie, a training, a cooperation. There is none of that, right? They are extracted from the rebels, and they made literally on the spot, making him specifically collecting the body tags of all the corpses around in the trench after the bombardment. Like, World War I was horrifying for so many reasons, but it's in such a close-knit group, like it forms within a unit, that's not exactly what happens, and that is kind of accurate or morally sensible to represent for what the message you want to deliver in this movie, right? There is, in fact, no hint of training, for example. There is no technicality in this war. It's as if these guys, again, are extrapolated from a scenario that could be anyone. You don't see their families, you don't see how they were trained, you don't see what they believed in politically, you don't see what, you don't see, we'll talk about that, you don't see socialism in this. Again, there was a big deal during World War I, the contrast between, of course, the pro-wars, the anti-war, it's not exactly like that in these terms, but let's say at least the burning political ideas, the sense that they were committed to something great. It is true that there are studies that showed how at least what they said in part, even to pretend that there was no responsibility politically, that Germany, this was mostly after World War II, but it dated back to before, the fact that this was essentially up to the century before a feudal country. It was, with the idea that first of all there is the state, then the emperor, then at that point the church, and then the family, and then you were just like the last element, like the last step of the ladder downwards. You had just to obey blindly, right? At least, not even this is showed, right? These kids seem paradoxically even much more like going to war at this point, towards the end of the war, or even at least some years had already passed since it had begun, as if everybody still thought that everything was kind of fine. You don't find it kind of anxiety, politically, morally, personally, individually, that sense of being torn apart. Again, it's true, the book looks at these kids that are inflamed with these ideas of nationalism, but if you don't show that, if you don't show that belief, and you don't see these individuals wrestling with the actual reality of the situation, and you don't explain how they would explain it, it looks kind of weird. I mean, the guy that volunteers for the front, that gets there the first day and starts saying, "I want my mama because I'm scared that there is a bombardment." The question is, okay, you can show people that freak out at the moment. That's maybe realistic, and you should also show it better. But there you just see a pavid kid that seemingly could be like a guy, the average kid from 2023, put in that context about which doesn't understand anything and says, why the hell am I even here? These were kids from the late 19th, the early 20th century. German Empire. They understood a lot, even though they may not have known the broader thing, of course, we'll talk about later at the top, but they came from a context that you somehow must give. These are weak people. People at the time, kids were much more mature at the time, right? At this, I think in the story, at least in Remark, they were something like 19 years old when they go there. So at that time, like by 14, 16, you were a made man. You were mature. You were considered like you. It was a pretty heavy, brutal war already. There were still lots of illnesses. The society was tough, very harsh. None of this seems to be there, right? It felt as if they wanted to say, look, maybe not excessively, but the sense that the average kid here is sent in an average war, and there is not an historical German kid from the First World War here, and the effort to represent him like that, right? It totally doesn't feel like that. By the way, as a military historian, I can say a bunch of things about before we pass to the odd stuff in a political term, etc., regarding combat, right? Because some things were not right. So the first thing you can understand from this movie is that they didn't consult any military historical expert as far as what they were interested in showing about combat was concerned. The trench, that is basically naturally the same. They had to save money, even if... and I understand them, I don't blame them, but sometimes when you want to make big movies, you also have to make something that looks a bit more like the broader picture. You can immediately understand whether something is done in a very small space. And the trenches didn't look so bad. I mean, they were a bit too kind of simple and just not particularly... You could see that it was not a World War I trench. It was not particularly well located. There is just a flat land, and these trenches are somehow not even shown in their entirety, in their articulation. They don't give you the sense of protection. It's just a ditch with, again, planks and barbed wire, but it's just functional to relatively small unit combat, right? You don't see the bigger deal, for which, of course, at this point, this was the moment in which the front was actually moving, because it was collapsing, right? So that thing, as we'll see now, is not sense strategically, which is a big deal for soldiers that are on the front and are basically just waiting for this big movements. Yes, there is a scene in which says, they make a bombardment, it's because the infantry has to come, but it's just obvious. It doesn't have any magnitude of it's just a minimal tactical or strategic notion, nothing that is meant to adapt to the setting per se, or that the setting is going to particularly show in that regard. There is the very first scene, which is very YouTube preview / Netflixian in the movies, as I was saying before. This random kid that you think may be the protagonist, instead is just another random kid that gets killed, and whose uniform gets to the actual protagonist. Is shown in combat, right? So this scene is somehow nonsensical, right? Because you have, as you don't see the French, because they're fighting in the French sector in northern France, the French trench at that point. You see just these kids that are basically filmed from within the trench, the typical shot during the attack. The attack has already started, so you don't see all the preparation, all the hype, the anxiety that is normally... Again, they showed it many times in World War I movies. You may be sick of that, but it's just like a supposedly, to me, a dynamic context in which these guys are getting over the top. The question of that, however, is that they're getting over the top as, and this is the main problem with movies today, is a sort of individuals, right? In this movie, the entire concept of unit, and so small unit tactics, because mostly the scale of what is represented just gets down to that, does not exist, right? There's not a slight sense of training, of combined arms, of even a sense of strategy. You see these kids that are going one by one, but not even in a row, just there's a random, NCO telling him, like, go up, and the trench is empty, almost, and of course the first guy that gets over the top gets immediately a shot in the head, because if you don't show that World War I movie, it's not a World War I movie. Like in this case, the combat takes place seemingly from very close trenches that are basically, I think, also, these are meant to be random there on the front, but it turns out they are, for practical needs in the movie, the same trench they would be using for the rest of the movie, right? And they're pretty close to the enemy ones, say a few hundred meters, not even. So it's one of those contexts in which this is not exactly the most typical one during the war, right? Most people think that World War I was just, they were so close in the trenches for one another. The most advanced posts really were, but the main line of the front were divided by some kilometers, right? So they didn't technically just, this thing again of putting the head out and being shot, it was a thing. There were snipers, trenches were pretty close to one another, but the biggest movements of what the average soldier would leave was actually pretty silent, boring, tiring, long march for a very long path into no man's land. It was again a much more static scenario than you think, right? And most of these attacks, so most movies show you just these guys out of the trenches and everybody gets shot immediately. Like, and nobody understands even why they would attack if they knew they would be massacred at the moment, which is in fact not what happened. Most attacks in World War I were carried out with, of course, the necessary manpower, and the combat began in the last, of course, the closest they got to the enemy at range of the various weapons, and they mostly succeeded. Right, they were properly calculated mathematically. Trench warfare, contrarily what you've been told, was an incredibly sophisticated and refined one, strategically and tactically. And it made a lot of sense. It was, of course, the best way to fight that war, in spite of what people actually are repeatedly indoctrinated as a mental disease being told. The alternative was properly not fighting the war, right? So in the moment in which they sent all these people to try to break through and they didn't make it, the objective was accomplished if you just hinged the enemy there, and you couldn't make it concentrate in other parts of the front. So there was nothing strange about that. There were as many deaths from the attackers for the one of, say, a bit less in the defenders, but still big ones, right, of the same scale. It wasn't just, again, a guy there with a machine gun taking out 100 people, and the other guy sending other 100 people to be killed by another, the same amount of machine gun fire. This is not World War I. This is not how it actually happened, right? In this first scene, you have even something more unusual. That is to say, basically the Germans and the French meeting into this middle ground between the two trenches, both attacking, which is ridiculous because the entire warfare there is designed with a dramatic, in fact, advantage given to the defense, and especially in this small unit combat, let's say, where the odds seem somehow balanced in that, like in that engagement, because eventually the thing cuts and says nothing, just in the moment in which the German kid is throwing a shovel into the neck of a French, and says, "Oh, nothing new," or "all quiet on the Western Front," as if this is a brutal slaughter. But it's, I think, quite. It can't be. Haha, okay, you made the effort, but what did you show? You showed basically the French and the Germans in the midst of this pretty short no man's land. They're basically engaging into a total random melee, like a rugby game. For no reason. Nobody understands why these guys are both attacking, why basically the artillery is firing in the same, more or less among the same people there, without any specific kind of concentration of fire against concentration of firepower of the soldiers trying to maintain that, or even better, if one of the two is attacking, because in war, yes, you can both attack, but generally speaking, especially in this context, you have just one guy that attacks and another that defends. Why would these kids would be sent over the top while the French, supposedly from the German perspective, were attacking? And you could just hope to kill a lot of them before they arrived, right? Instead here it's just I understand they wanted to show the chaos of war, but generally speaking, combat does not work like that. Humans do not get into random melees. This is what at least even the average idiot is able to criticize from Hollywood movies. Without cover, without a sense of, again, you have powerful firearms. This should just make the combat enveloping in a completely, especially in open ground, in a completely different dynamic, right? Why does that happen? Why did you want to show it, right? How can the artillery understand who's who there? You want to show chaos, you want to show anarchy, but just know that war, most of the time, is really not that, right? War is unpredictable in the outcome, but the way, again, World War I's tactical strategy, was just one of any other year of work, was pretty darn rational, cold, precise. This one balance, right? People commanding were very competent. These were, again, at least we are presented with an average, in fact, Western Front reality. This thing didn't happen as you showed. You don't, right? That there is here at least all quiet on the front of not understanding shit about what a battlefield is, right? For movie makers, which we are frankly tired of, for their incompetent negligence, for which of course nobody who made this movie ever thought that they were trying to reproduce something that could look similar to an actual engagement. They had to keep it simple, right? I understand that. It's a need of the movie because they don't want to focus maybe too much on tactics. They don't want to spend themselves too much in that direction. But as a general background, couldn't you show something that makes sense? As other movies tend to make that, right? There are many World War I movies, and again, they depict something slightly better than this. So, also, again, gruesome, accurate, really not, right? Gruesome, yes, but not so why should this be the movie that looks the actual face of what World War the First was? It's plenty of movies about World War the First that show much grimmer pictures about the war, much more horrifying, gory, dramatic, and impactful scenes. This movie doesn't, in my opinion. Right? It just shows, again, namely very violent things, but emotionally, in my opinion, it doesn't hit the mark. There is, in fact, also a relatively few amount of gore, considering also what the book talks about. You find lots of people being killed in the most diverse way, but you don't see much of a openly, let's say, pathetic moment in which even the protagonist stabs the French soldier there in the crater is somehow, I will explain now why it didn't kind of hit me really, because it's somehow inaccurate even for the book, because that should have been okay. I will talk about it now because it's at the end of a sequence that I want to discuss. Right, this sequence is the most complete about the battle, about combat, say, in which they get into this random thing, and they assault the French trench successfully. You see here perhaps one of the few comprehensive scenes in cinema in which at least there is a quick assault to a trench that again doesn't seem to, it's just an avant-post, so this would have been relatively weaker, but again, so exposed, trenches weren't, and as much as they weren't so easy to simply in a couple of minutes to take out, right? So everything is a flatland, by the way, so there isn't any kind of sense of relief or context or heights or whatever. There are beautiful movies, even in black and white, that show a much more composite kind of fighting in trenches, fortifications scattered everywhere that is really remarkable. So this makes it also flatter, tactically speaking, and somehow, in fact, also less credible. Again, first of all, when you have an enemy in front of you, generally speaking, during World War I, you know what that enemy is about. You have recon planes, you have just the soldier testing, looking, seeing, hearing. They have an idea of what is out there, unless it's a specific surprise attack, some Stoßtruppen tactics that at that time were, in fact, quite developed. But generally speaking, trench warfare was never surpassed during World War I. Even the introduction of tanks was not enough to break World War I. It was mostly in the early 20s that they finally made tanks rendering trench warfare useless, right? Doctrinally speaking, tactically speaking. So here we see mostly, in my opinion, an imbalance that can happen on a battlefield between the forces involved, but also general, so that you can easily take a trench like that, but also general ignorance about what forces the enemy really has out there, because it turns out that the French, as soon as the Germans take this French trench, are attacked from the posterior French lines by tanks, right, that appear in a very kind of supposedly terrifying fashion. Actually, it looks too fake. And the only positive scene is the fact that they had just stormed the trench. They were eating all, and there is the accurate French brand of meat in the canteen, and this hungry German soldiers immediately. That is realistic enough. A remark this show that in the book also consistently immediately eat everything they find, because they're always looking forward to that, and they hear the heart trembling, and all the rats begin to come out to escape from the trench, from the canteen, and at that point they realize these tanks are arriving, and again everything is flat. You see only these tanks that are also, I mean, I think the highest concentration of tanks in just in the war at the time was, even in the most densely concentrated realities, not more than, I don't know, one tank more over 80, 90 soldiers, something like that. Here you have a somehow heavy concentration of tanks that, as we will see also in the rest of the action, they don't make this great breakthrough, right? Basically, they just managed to repel the Germans from this French that has been just conquered, and that was literally just a few hundred meters, like not even, like it could be 100 meters, 150. So again, I'm maybe picky about the spaces here. Of course, they filmed the movie just, and they didn't have to make a documentary about the war, but generally speaking, you have these tanks arriving, and the tanks managed to push back the Germans, and the way it happens, the Germans that are eventually not pushed from their previous positions. I mean, if these tanks arrive and the Germans are completely broken and retreat en masse, why wouldn't this French push further, right? What is there of terrible? Admittedly, the Germans abandoned also the previous trench, but they remain in the same place because this trench where the whole movie takes place is just next to this village where the rear lines were located, and it feels like, why wouldn't the French advance further? Just in time passes and passes. There is not even a clear timeline, but you understand it's in days or more. So if the French had all this armored power concentrated, why didn't they push through? In a moment in which, in fact, generally speaking, the German front was dramatically shattered, and in fact there was a fierce resistance, but the Allies were breaking through dramatically. So in all that sense, there is not. These Germans always slept in the same place. They're tired, exhausted, whatever, but even not overbearingly much, at least compared to what Remarque showed us. And nobody takes in consideration, but why wouldn't the French break through here? Probably that strategic dimension is not present. Again, they wanted to show the scene in which the tanks arrive, and it's pretty bizarre because, first of all, these tanks arrive. They pass over the trench, right? So that when, especially the protagonist starts fleeing with all the other Germans, some French tanks are even ahead, like between no man's land, and also one of the guys from the squad puts like a grenade inside it, and their own squad manages to kill the crew and shooting the few ones that were coming out. And when they turn, basically they see that it doesn't really make you understand the thing very well. That there is just, imagine, like all over the line, the trench that were leaving, there were French flamethrowers, soldiers with flamethrowers, just simply burning the hell out of the Germans inside of the trench. Now, I understand the shock of the armor attack and everything, but let's say the question is, everybody's fleeing, but we're still doing those Germans there, and how were both the tanks and these flamethrowers simply march on the edge of the trench, which is ridiculous. Just they have a lot of firepower, literally, but the question is, how were they? And I mean, the Germans inside the trench were all well, equipped and whatever. The trench may have not been suited for firing backwards, from which the French were advancing, but there is actually a scene in that very moment before the tanks arrive in which the Germans actually are over the top, at least leaning and waiting with machine guns properly turned backwards, also fixed once, so you wonder how the thing really was. In any case, those flamethrowers are simply standing with, it turns out, also some Germans that could shoot them back, and we'll see it now, and simply burning everybody inside. I know it's a pretty powerful scene if you think about it conceptually, but the question is, give me actually the capacity of making a movie, and I will show you how that would have mostly looked like, an incredibly more slow, attemptive kind of, even when very dynamic, still very much more thickly packed combined arms and cohesively, aggressive kind of attack. And again, these tanks that advance beyond the trench, there are just these flamethrowers behind it. You don't find much of other soldiers, except flamethrowers, by the way, so concentrated just to burn like 3 flamethrowers concentrated in a 5-meter space. And of course, at this point, there is the scene that cannot fail to exist since Saving Private Ryan, because if a movie doesn't imitate that, the maker will die, or who knows what. The guy gets shell-shocked in a way, at least temporarily, and he stands. Of course, everybody runs. Hundreds of Germans are just turning, and of course none of them experiences any other shock. Nobody is laying down or pulling out or whatever, and he's the only one that looks like an idiot, of course, backwards, to see his friend, which is not even technically the same character in the movie, that died. They swapped kind of characters, or they didn't show the same thing. That, of course, asked to surrender to the French that have suddenly so arrived out of the blue, and the French conveniently wait and burn him alive, and then shoot him to death in front, of course, of the eyes of the poor protagonist, right? And again, there are scenes in which they shoot at the tank with the rifles. I understand that machine gun fire was used with particular anti-tank ammo to be concentrated against the tanks, especially the sides of which were permeable, could be pierced. But even if you're shocked or afraid in the trench while the tank is passing over, what are you shooting at the tank for? You should be freaking out and running away, of course, as most of what people were doing there, but it's a detail. Why do you want to add that? What's the point of that all? The other thing that is somehow not unrealistic in absolute terms, but it still doesn't picture what maybe a herd behavior and what could make more reliably realistic this thing, aside from others, like the fact that the protagonist conveniently advances in this total hell, by the way, in which people die just next to him, precisely in the moment in which they're raising their heads. There is a single shot in the head. Understand, again, everything can happen, but for the movie, surprise, surprise, you have to show exactly the moment it happens. It can't be a much less scenographic way, right? Like in other movies, by the way. The guy gets immediately next to a little mound and throws a grenade without even watching, and immediately kills a bunch of French, right? And so it's, it's a lucky shot. You wouldn't normally probably even have that, or have the notion to immediately rise up and run into a nest of enemies. I know it's all heated, conceited, but it's not rendered in a way that makes you feel the guy is real about being on an actual battlefield. And it's difficult to render, but you could think about that. The weird thing is that basically in that scene in which they managed to destroy a tank, to disable a tank, it's their squad, right? They're just retreating out of the trench they had temporarily occupied. All in a very short sequence, by the way. It's not a dramatically developed, you're watching that and saying, oh my god, this is such a finely recreated action. No, it's all very flat, because the Germans either all attack or all retreat. Nobody's doing particularly else, except, of course, the squad of these guys that is not particularly, experienced or capable. Nobody has showed any of that, right? But they decide to knock out this tank immediately, easily. And in the meanwhile, they decide simply to turn and shoot at the advancing French. Literally all the Germans are fleeing, and nobody knows why nobody else should have turned to shoot, by the way, in a completely useless way, because the French were literally overwhelming them. For what? Like, what's the sense of that? It's only then that later that they see that there was a comrade that had been left behind in the scene, killed, etc. But in that moment, the scene hadn't set you up for that. Why are they shooting? Why aren't they running away? with this tanks gunning down everyone in the process. Right? This is somehow bizarre. And again, if there had been so many tanks out there, they would have known first. They would have also been further overwhelmed from the place which they stayed, because apparently they could reach the battlefield in a very quick time, as later in the movie is showed. And this battle, yes, was meant to show the brutality and everything and the terrible situation, but strategically, what did happen in this battlefield? I mean, what were those soldiers doing? Nobody tells you, right? It's just like an abstract situation that is, in theory, provided with a context of those guys remaining always in that same place and not telling you what any consequence this military action had on the strategy of the whole thing. Or anybody questioning, should we get out of here later? No, it's just to stay there, camping, vacation, just so, right? It is pretty weird, and I didn't appreciate much this combat situation, because again, it's full of cliches in many ways. For not talking about, again, the flatness of that all as far as the characters are involved as well. I mean, I think the most important objective of a World War I movie, especially based on Remark, it would be to show as I said before, the inner struggle of these people. Here, it doesn't seem to be a struggle, right? The way this kid gets used to homicidal violence is practically skipped entirely. It's just showed he's able to kill without much of a problem. Also, the short distance, right? There is the scene that is present also in the book, because in the book it's specified that it's the first one in which the kid kills a French soldier in hand-to-hand combat, at short range, right? So that scene impacts him dramatically because, first of all, the guy takes hours to die. In the book here, it takes just a few minutes, and he swears on the core, and on the corpse. There is something in the movie that also is just anecdotal, because it's a reference from the book, but it doesn't evolve dramatically, right? In the movie, it doesn't come back, right? The French soldier dies because the kid stabs him in the chest to death, and he looks at his papers, looks at his name and the face, the photo of his wife and his daughter, and so he swears. It doesn't say anything in the movie, but probably to bring this personal effects back to his family, probably at some point or something like that. You would think that is a line just that would recur in the movie. The movie instead goes on, and there's nothing to do with that. Right? It's just to show, oh my god, this kid killed this guy stabbing him, and then gets repented when he sees dying. Right? It's not a very powerful scene. I mean, it may be one of the best of the movie, indeed, and it's one of those one of those scenes that you don't feel like, oh my god, yes, it's cliche, but it's cringy because of it. No, you can watch it. The only point is it doesn't quite get there, and it doesn't click, however, with the narrative there, because this is at the end of the battle that I just described, and during that battle, the protagonist had actually already killed with a shovel, or actually had severely injured with a shovel, another French kid, and one of his German comrades shoots the kid right in the head in front of him, and while he was probably wondering whether to kill him to finish him off, and the event again, it's in the heat of the action. They have just entered the trench, so again, it's not showed in a hard, let's say, in a breathtaking, fast-paced fashion to say, oh my god, there was no time to think, right? It could have dramatically shocked him just as much as would dramatically shock him to stab that guy in the crater, right? So it doesn't make so much sense. It looks like as an excuse to say, oh my god, there is the moving situation in which you show the French soldier that is called Gerard Duval and has his daughter, and well, alright, but I mean, how did this kid decide to effectively become a killing machine? None of that is shown, right? He's not also properly simply presented as a killing machine. Again, there is not much of a combat technicality there that is showed. Zero about training, zero about combined arm, say unit tactics in the first place. A generally abstract, kind of inconclusive strategic tactical point that is to be made about all this. By the way, he remains in the crater with this dead French soldier. He tries the thing with the helmet on a stick to see if there were snipers. You would think the French to be advancing further, as we were saying before, especially with all those tanks. Instead, nothing happens. And just you would say, how the hell did it come back from no man's land? Because normally in other movies, that's kind of a journey. You have to go through hell, right? Instead, the scene after, you see just this kid walking, not even at night, just at dawn. There is enough light to get shot anyway, and comes back at night in the camp. Like literally after this battle, it should have shocked them, destroyed them. It's as if he came back home after, I don't know, a day of school and says, "Oh, you're alive. Oh, yes, I'm so happy and glad." I mean, it doesn't meet with properly what would you think combat psychology and this dramatically brutal context would impact properly the character. Right? None of that tension is actually expressed throughout the movie. Except for a brief moment we see here. By the way, the only other point in a movie about World War I that wants to show a bit of a battle, that there is when the Germans are retreating from the original trench in that day, there is like the only kind of nice scene from the above with all the craters filled in water, whatever, lasting 3 seconds. Right, so you had the CGI or whatever to show that, but you wouldn't give us any other aerial kind of dimensional understanding of what these trenches really are. Because there is, veterans also speak of that, there is something dramatically beautiful about the visual dimension of war. That this big sense that you're part of a big army when you see cannons in the as thunders in the background. There is this actually in the movie, but it's not comprehensive. You're not shown as a part of a big force that is struggling and wrestling with another one, and you're not transmitting minimally the tension of that scenario. Right? Again, it feels like the guys have gone camping, as if the Western Front was just about this little unit that held this meaningful amount of space that could simply be broken through by the French, but that doesn't happen for some strange reason, in spite you've just made all the Germans retreat from those positions, and for them to still remain in the same place where they have gone sleeping when, say we have been staying when they were not in the front at the front line. So it's kind of that is just next door, because the guys literally arrives there on foot after the battle. So technically, it's a moment especially a defeat, in which you're psychophysically destroyed, especially from a more mental point of view. There are people who literally die by themselves. They collapse, right? And here, now let's make this walk till the camp. It's not a dramatic thing. It's not showed as that. It's like a joke, right? Then you wonder why kids do not quite understand. I say children trying to degrade the average adult. Of course, I don't mean children, but kids, right? Can be even 80 years old. If they don't understand really anything about warfare, is also because of the way you tell the story in movies. This movie is presented and resonates as, oh my god, it has to show the gruesome reality of warfare. And this is how you actually tell the story of a battle. I mean, it may be that I specialize exactly in this. That's what I do for a living. Exactly this very part. But seriously, like, can't you know that? Can't you find any information? Can't you even mentally picture, especially if you're so fixated with the context to make a movie on it, to find anyone around us that has an idea of what that could be, and showing how dramatic that really was, instead than that pathetic scene at the beginning with the kids getting bombed. I mean, it feels like so cheap and superficial and probably disrespectful towards, for example, just the book that is much dramatically psychological, insightful. It also makes a political point that we'll get to now. This thing doesn't even transpire. Why? We'll try to see it now. First of all, there is a line during. I can't think of again other details about the calm, but there's just a scene in which they go exploring a town that had been gassed, where some Germans were, and they enter in a I think where it was the Germans were sleeping simply, and they don't find anybody around, which is also kind of weird. Where they find everybody dead because they said they didn't wait enough to take away their gas masks. I mean, I didn't really understand that scene. So basically, these Germans were gas shelled there. They get into this place, which is not a dormitory. It's just a place where all these corpses now are en masse because they died on the spot there. And they said, "Oh my God, they're a bunch of idiots. Germany will run out of men because these guys took off their masks too early." Everybody in the same way. There's nobody crawling around this place. There's nothing, like no trace of the whole thing. It's pretty weird. Yes, admittedly, there was a big explosion somewhere. They find a guy, basically a corpse, all disfigured on a tree. Just that's the top gore that they could make about this movie that looks really unimpressive. And they find this, and that's like an episode on its own, right? It doesn't have any connection with the rest of the movie. That's also pretty weird. I mean, if you want to make a movie, the ABC of filmography, the things like what you show must be consistent with also the plot, the frame. Otherwise, it's just like take a picture of that and post it somewhere. Don't make a movie. Nobody gives a shit about that, right? So as we were saying before, there is really no care to show, even in interest of time, etc., how the protagonist changes from having been sent to the front to the battle lines. Yes, you have the sense that, of course, he is more tired and whatever, but you don't know how the kid changes mind about the whole thing. Again, the book is basically all about that. It's also much more wired in that sense to the actual experience of various combat, of how the individual friends die. So it's much more dramatic, of course, and you really feel more. This thing is, at some point during the big battle, when they retreat, the only thing this guy says to the older guy, that in his 40s, that was a bit more the grizzled veteran with a professional background, says, "Oh, I miss all my comrades," because he had left at least a couple behind. One had just been burned alive in front of his eyes. And the guy answers, "And I miss my mom. So get your ammo and let's get the hell out of here." And that's literally the only reference to the. Of course, they are sad when they learn that somebody died, whatever. But it doesn't. Basically, it's not consequential to any visible change in the character. Which not only in the book is, but you understand it's a blow after another. Especially the worst thing that happened to apparently what he would look like his best friend, that again in the story actually gets only his leg amputated and actually saves himself, if we can so say. Again, the characters are swapped, but when he gets again burned alive and shot down, well, you would expect that to have a traumatic impact on the kid, or to make him degenerate somewhere darker. There's none of this, right? So it's very weird. Regarding this broader background, which is the thing that I'm actually much more interested in, and that I leave as in all my videos to the last, is the concept of what were these guys doing there, right? So these are German soldiers. They They know why they're there. They're men, right? Even the kids are within other men, right? And NCOs and officers. Again, this sense of camaraderie is mostly within their squad. There is not a sense even of much of hierarchy, except, as we'll see now, the top guy that is the evil guy, but is detached from the battlefield. And that's the most bullshit moment. It has nothing to do with the book, by the way. There is just this line that is randomly spoken towards I think it was at 2/4 of the movie, so it was a bit like a bit anecdotal, but it resonates if you understand what it means. That says, one of the soldiers says, "Give power to a man, and the man becomes a beast." Right? I think they were talking about some of their superiors, right? But the concept again, give power to a man, and the man becomes a beast. Right? Philosophically, politically, you know where I come from. Pretty clearly. Why would giving power to a man making the man a beast? Right? Actually, men are beasts when they are uncivilized, when they don't have any sense of authority, of discipline, or hierarchy, of rationale. Right? So it is true that power, this is, of course, an important conception in philosophy, whatever. Power requires a lot of responsibility. It can make you also darker than the one you are, but it's just, again, how you handle that, if you succeed or not. Our entire civilization is based on merit, on the fact that if you are able to maintain power because you're a competent person and knows how to that's why, again, we have hierarchies. That's why we have states. That's why we can also safeguard rights. We can do this also because we have guns in our hand and we know how to use them competently. The military is there for that reason. We don't live in a bunch of primitive, anarchic reality where, we have to escape from power because power is the terrible thing. This is actually a fourth estater mental disorder. I mean, the entire concept that if you give power to someone, they will become a beast. Right now, what does it actually mean? Right? That, I don't know, people who give, first of all, who does give power to whom? And why would the person with power just become a beast? That doesn't sound right. Right? Politics doesn't work like that. Most likely, when beasts were stupid people give power to another stupid person, that's where there is chance that as beasts they gave power to another beast to be a beast. But normally this is not the point in the first place. Also, we don't live really, politically, we never lived in an absolutistic reality where, there is somebody who rules and the others don't. Right? That's also what most people actually believe, because the new religion of fourth estaters nowadays, that there is some sort of tyrant that runs the world, and the poor people, some strange martyrs, and they're actually good, and the terrible elites made. The terrible elites are the ones for which the world is stable, because if you had to give it to the average person, it would collapse overnight. And that's the reason why we have hierarchies in the first place. But secondly, where's your, our entire concept, especially after World War II, this is present in Western civilization, in others, since ever, as the foundation of the state, of civic duty and everything. We all know that for anyone to rule, the decisive moral support of the population has to be given. Even in totalitarian regimes, there is not a case, a regime that rules and the people are innocent and under and victims. That the people make it happen, especially in totalitarian regimes. I would like to remind you that Hitler was democratically elected. And I really mean it, because even if there was some system of political violence, etc., this was tolerated by other people that didn't pick weapons, that didn't make it happen, and still they received constitutionally, institutionally, the relative majority of votes to make Hitler German chancellor. So, and the war continued because, of course, people continued to support the government. So the myth that we are somehow slaves of some terrible guy over us and we are martyrs is, of course, just a childish abortion of dignity of mankind, I think, because you don't even prove yourself to be adequate enough to understand literally what civic duties and rights really mean. And of course, you cannot understand anything historically, starting from World War the First, World War the Second. So that phrase disturbed me a bit because, like, of all the things that could be said, here there wasn't any particular reference to. It was just a superior, like a law officer, nothing particularly important. But how the movie actually develops and the secondary story lines and plots that occur, we'll see now, evolve, actually makes you think that there is a sort of subliminal message that the movie doesn't say out loud, but basically wants to express. In fact, in this movie, you have the main line, which, again, is not even that particularly developed. These guys mostly talk to each other. They don't say very meaningful things. Just there is the friendship between them. It's, again, all very superficial. There's not much of an introspection of the characters, much of a sense of it. You follow the protagonist, so you wire mostly with him because he's mostly where you see the thing from, the perspective of. But there isn't any deeper deal about them. They talk about their families, what they do at home. That's it. Right? They don't say, I believe in this politically, for example, or I believe this about the French, or I believe this about the war. We will see now, actually, they say something about that, and that's also stranger than what we just said. Because the movie actually has three plots, three lines, at least three branches that run in parallel. The first one is, again, the soldiers in the trench. The second one is between a regiment commander, which is a fictional character called Friedrichs, which is just with the soldiers of this regiment there at the front in the rear, like in this kind of villa, this house where he eats well because he's a respected officer. He has an attendant. This guy is basically the prototypal kind of Junker, kind of Prussian militarist, if you want. Here, I don't remember where he comes from, but basically he says that his father had been in all three the wars of Bismarck, in the time in which there were real wars, right? He says this, but the movie doesn't explain. It's that basically he didn't consider this a real war because the Germans were losing. Right, so he says to his attendant, I was born too late because those were the times. So in the moments of the great, as you know, of the Prussian and German victories, and the days of glory. And it turns out, of course, that he's depicted as the asshole of the situation, right? This is basically the antagonist of the movie, even though he, just at the end, he interacts with the troops because he forces them to attack in the last hours before the armistice is effective, so the war ends, because he couldn't stand the fact that some horse fuckers, he says, were selling out Germany to the Allies, right, by making this peace, and so the concept being, of course, that he doesn't like the fact that Germany loses, and he wants to show the French, even though the war is lost anyway. He understands that this last attack will make them see what we're made of, and so on. And so basically, the whole movie is just a big boo to this guy. That is also, he talks at dinner with his attendant, talks about his life. His attendant asks about his father, says, well, my father, basically turns out that he didn't have a good relation with his father, that it was just a rigid militarist. He just knew him a bit when he was a child, and then he became a soldier, and he had nothing else out of that. So he says everybody is born alone, lives alone, and dies alone. And so basically, this is supposed to make you understand that Wu sends guys to die for a useless purpose. And of course, the useless purpose is that the war was ending, so in the last hours he decides to do that. So it's not about the whole war, because otherwise the movie would have just been inconsistent, because there is no basically other point to make this kind of statement without sounding ridiculous about why even World War I was fought in the first place, which is not about saying they were right or wrong in doing that, but in the first place understanding historically why it was fought. Which is not, I don't know, because there were a bunch of crazy motherfuckers, bloodthirsty animals. No, it wasn't because of that. Even when they were fucked up, even when these people surely had pretty strange ideas in mind, whatever, it wasn't because of that irrationality was fought. As a matter of fact, politics, according to the Clausewitzian Trinity, is properly the field of greatest rationality that a culture can express in the first place. So World War I was fought for actually obviously and very important reasons. Like you can't, today we'll not talk about this. If anything, I will have to make a video about it. So, say answering whether all those lives were worth it is a bit, should be answered a bit in historical perspective, also with all the other wars that have always been fought in the history of mankind. There are not episodic ones like World War I that you can characterize and not framing as still wars as we still fight them for all the possible reasons, even when they may be stupid reasons at some point, or at least wrong assessments and, properly, something that was a mistake retrospectively. Due to incompetence, whatever. It's never only about that. You can say pinpoint that. That's something you can cherry pick it and making the whole thing. But if you don't get the context, which is also politically, historically, culturally very important, you can't quite understand why would people even again support the decision of going to war, which again is not necessarily deriving from every war is just or right, or reasonable, or advantageous to fight. This is not to say that. This is to say that in order to go at war, the world had pretty severe macroscopic reasons for doing that, and we know those. So, all those that still alone do not mean anything if you don't even give these people, in fact, an actual face, an actual brain, if you understand what they were supporting at home, if you understand what they actually thought about each other, which was hardly the kind of typical British drama about World War I, about the British and the German soldier that play cards and show photos of their family. They hated each other guts. They dehumanized each other on a regular basis, and because they had specific reason for doing that. How do you think wars are fought? Again, a stupid mad guy at the top rolls the dice, and the poor masses go butchering each other. I mean, first of all, you're saying that everybody's an idiot, including the masses, and secondly, because of course nobody has the power to coerce the masses physically to go kill somebody else without the actual consent of the masses. Again, if you have been living thinking that historically, you may have severe educational, personal, moral, scientific problems, right? You may not actually understand much of the reality that surrounds you. You may probably lack the most elementary notions of political theory, of sociological dynamics, again, it's not all sort of let's run after bullshit. There is something concrete behind it, even behind the worst possible choices, right? And never, learn to evaluate what are the shades of likelihood that something can happen. That's where unpredictability of a war lays in, right? Where, for example, countless successful wars were objectively also worth being fought on a moral ground that, were like retrospectively also a good idea because they succeeded, but there was no certainty at the moment in which we started whether they would have succeeded or not. Right, so eventually we can say, well, that went well, and there's not much of a cultural or backlash or anything against that. Like most wars that have ever been fought, people just stick around the wars that make more noise in the media, but they don't actually understand much, again, about the historical picture overall, and naturally the fact that all these wars are intertwined and more, just like with politics and society. But literally, we are okay with that simply because they ended in a certain way, but before they could have been seen as bad ideas, and you could have not said it. And whether something is more or less risky doesn't necessarily mean that it's kind of per se. Same thing as saying a good thing or a bad thing. It depends on how much you invest in that, how, for what it's done, and again how it's done. But again, I will not keep talking about this. But again, to make the long story short, this Friedrichs is just the hideous guy that hates himself, hates the world, has problems with the family, because that's basically where the thing has to happen too. However, it's again an original insertion from the book that has nothing of this. So you understand how vile this movie technically is. They had to invent a guy that is evil, that is stupid, that is despicable, in order to load people in against war in an anti-war movie. This is a very big fail in terms of the delivery of the anti-war message. I believe, again, that anti-war ideology is basically a fascist ideology. It applies to lesser people from either nationalistic or socialistic background, or both of them. And of course, it's the religion of the Fourth Estate nowadays. Fortunately, the Fourth Estate is counting ever less as far as the individuals are concerned. So the media may make you look at the thing as if now, oh my God, we're so all anti-war, we understood the lesson. No, you don't. Because if you don't have problems with this movie from the beginning to the end, by scale and with what they wanted to say and how, it means that you literally do not know anything about history, about war, about morals, about nothing. Right? You just don't care, because this movie is the actual proof. Every movie has a historical context, right? This movie is the proof that in 2022, nobody gives a shit about history, by any degree, nor for how things were actually fought on the battlefield, or how these kids actually died, for why they died. The movie simply doesn't give a shit about that, nor the people watching it. Right? They faked that. They want to act hypocritically on the base of, oh yes, we show a bunch of kids killing each other so that somebody will shed a tear. Emotional people will do. I say this movie is, again, something you can show a teenager, and still with some reserves, because I think a person from high school should already be able to criticize more or less in the way I am doing, without too many problems about at least the core issue of this movie. Now, the third plot of this movie, again, this goes on because it affects also the storyline of the other two, is actually the negotiations on the train of Compiègne, right? The one of the armistice of 1918 with the Allied delegation, the German delegation, which is like, I'm not against that in the movie. It's just there is here a characterization here and there that I don't like, because it's all very simplified. The thing I'm mostly discontent with this is that it's, again, just like if you wanted to talk about that, if you wanted to recreate that setting, whatever, make a movie about that. Make a movie about Hindenburg. Make a movie about what probably the political situation in Germany was at the time, but everything was falling apart. It would be very interesting. Make the scene of on the train at Compiègne and everything. Characterize. There are some movies like, I don't know, the one of the Wannsee Conference in 1942. I mean, they are very just like in a single room, but they are somehow engaging. Right, because they're meant to show something. Then you may not be satisfied with how it's done historically or characterly, with a cast or whatever. But make that. This here, you see, of course, it's understandable what they wanted to do in the movie. They wanted to show the top, like the elite in a sense, and the bottom people at the front. It fails a bit because these three lines are the first one monopolized. I mean, it's the most important one. Like the other two do not quite get so much into action. They are important, don't get me wrong, but they're not developed. Already the first line is not developed so much. Right, these other two are just like an excuse to show certain things. Right, for example, about the armistice, I would have. It's interesting because, for example, Erzberger is shown that there is, I would say, a slight French demonization in this series. I would point out for reasons I will explain now, because they show Falk basically dictating the surrender again. Everything is simplified. I would have liked to see a movie about the armistice worth properly such name. But it's insufficient, right, to show such a big important historical situation in such few scenes that also lack a bit solemnity, right? That show a bit this mere bitterness and kind of intransigence of the high commands. By the way, you do not see the German one, because this is the point. You don't show the German high command as such. You don't know what they were talking about. You just see this Friedrichs that I don't know whether they inserted because they didn't want to cause too much criticism politically, because probably they understood that the movie didn't have the capacity to provide with an adequate historical criticism or depiction or take in any way about what was happening in Germany there. It felt, in my opinion, would have felt better if the soldiers themselves had hanged on the news that they received. If the sense of waiting for Godot, that this idea that, what are they doing at the top, and not showing what is happening at the top, just knowing voices. But that would have become too political. They would have had to characterize politically the characters. They would have had to provide with some of a broader setting, showing how the news were delivered. So showing that there was a detached reality from which they depended on, and that made them feel part of a much bigger, glooming thing in this collapse of the Western Front and of Germany from the within, which is actually a pretty scary and upsetting thing. What would happen to your families? What would happen to society? People were scared legitimately of... I mean, there had been the Russian Revolution. There had been, again, there were Soviets popping out all over Germany. There was hunger. There was suffering. This is showed partly in the negotiations of the armistice, anecdotally, though. It's just like a line saying, oh, please, General Falk, don't be so hard, because let's get it over with. Like, also within the German delegation, Erzberger, that, as you know, is the guy that actually was assassinated in 1921 by the nationalists for having signed the armistice, in fact. And that in the movie he says it too, that his son had died during service. They don't specify it in the movie, but actually he died of influenza, not of in combat. In any case, Erzberger is an interesting figure historically. You can look him up, and I'm glad at least that this movie represents him as a kind of a positive figure. Still, however, the feeling is that these allies are bastards. A bit that kind of excuse that, I don't know, Germany was so prostrated by the French after World War II, after World War I, that they kind of it triggered Nazism. So if it hadn't been for those damn frogs, we would have not had Hitler and everything. That's a pretty silly idea, right? For many reasons that I will not explain now, but the movie indulges a bit too much into this concept. Of course, there the Germans were the ones losing, so they were trying to beg for some kind of, lighter conditions, and the French are depicted, I would say, respectfully in a way, and pointing out also the fact that the Germans hadn't been fair that now they were dictating the conditions. This is the sense that they want to give you there. But you see what happens is that basically the entire, say, line of command and of responsibilities in the German army, the German state, whatever, is not showed. Right? You see, the worst thing that the Germans do in this movie is stealing cheese and eggs from a French farm, right? And getting shot, by the way, at least one of the German protagonists gets shot by a kid in the process, and that's kind of the only retribution to kind of a war crime that the Germans are depicted like doing. Instead, the French kill pretty mercilessly people that are basically surrendering. I mean, it's not that it didn't happen, being, for example, still in World War II, being a prisoner of the French wasn't actually a very good experience. I'm not trying to make it like a football match here, but I just think that here the Germans are represented as if, they were somehow unaware of the situation, and or that what the soldiers were doing were something that simply happened. They were in without any particular moral struggle, right? Just there's only one scene which is supposed to fix this, but that, in my opinion, fails to deliver it, meaning that after that battle, and which is incidentally just the day before the armistice, on November the 11th. So technically the night before Friedrich decides that his regiment has to attack the French just in the last hours before the end of the war, where obviously the protagonist dies, and so, in which the protagonist talks to basically the last friend that has remained to him, which is incidentally the same guy that the next morning had nothing better to do than getting shot by the French kid just a few hours before the war, for stealing his food. That's actually the only sense, again, that who made the movie made you understand that at least in that condition the Germans were doing something wrong. And in fact, it makes you hate these guys in as much as they also got themselves, this guy specifically got himself killed for something so stupid, right? Because you wish at least for him to come back home, because they were talking about the family, the following Christmas, etc. And you have nothing better to do than go stealing stuff from people that had already shot you previously, and that in fact shot you even on that occasion. You're pretty stupid, right? And that maybe is meant to show the childishness of these people. The guy here was the one in his 40s who had a bit more of experience, right? With the protagonist that is still a kid in the process. And there is a talk the night before the battle in which basically the kid has some inner moral struggle. You're not told what it really is about, because again, in this day he has seen his best friend being burned alive and shot to death, and this other guy in his 40s had his child dying of smallpox during the war, same war. They have seen all their friends dying just right away, because one of them killed himself as he was wounded in the last day of the war, and decides to kill himself by basically cutting his own throat in front of them, by the way, which is something. There is some reference to the suicide in remark, but I don't think it's done, because I think he didn't have a revolver. It's quite difficult to stab yourself to death so consistently by resisting pain and all this stuff, right? Even if you had thought you would be dying of septicemia or something like that, he's being shot at the leg. In any case, the protagonist tells now in this terrible night from one side, but also everybody had known the war was about to be over on the same day. Like, he says something like, I think that the we have to be living now with this, right? Even when the war is over, the stench will not go away from us, right? And the other guy says, don't think about it, and also don't be upset about these guys that have just died, because at least they have stopped suffering, and we are the ones who are keeping to live, but we are also the lucky ones. So there is not a dramatic turn like in Remark, where when the best friends, the protagonist's best friend dies, the protagonist basically breaks down and wants to die, or at least doesn't believe in living anymore, which is terrifying. You have here something else. You find these guys actually happy the following morning and say, oh my god, the war is over. Yes, there is some sense of of bitterness overall. They understand this is not normal. But that phrase, we will not be able to take away the dirt, the stench, and I remember from us, from what happened to us in the trenches. This whole thing is an interesting statement, meaning that, of course, we know nowadays, at the time, there wasn't much of an awareness. Actually, it would start with World War I and shell-shocked people, this kind of mental traumas. And we wouldn't understand them well until after World War II, basically. But, of course, there is a deeper existential anxiety that, however, is not really motivated. It doesn't say, what is about these trenches, right? At some point, one of, say, during the same conversation, the other guy says, we are just homicide, killers, right, or something like that. That's what we do here. But there is not a follow-up to this. It doesn't say, well, I repent killing these people. Obviously, when the protagonist killed the French, he repents, but he had just kind of killed other people just before, in front of his eyes, which was also different from the movie, where that had not yet happened so close. Did you have to arrive to the last day of the war to get repented about a single guy you would stab? I understand it's a stupid movie, right? But it all feels like they wanted to make this sense of guilt, right, entering for having fought in the war, but they don't explain to you in what it actually consisted. You can guess, of course, it was about, oh my god, I killed another person, this was a father, a husband, whatever. But what's the problem with you? Do you see a problem with yourself just because you merely feel it for yourself, or do you see a problem with, for example, with how you were fanatically exalted before? Because everybody shouted at the beginning when they get instructed by the Burgmeister about going to war and the great honor of that. It's all implied, but it's never made clear during the movie. They don't know whether they felt guilty about the fact that they invaded, they attacked another country, or they killed other people in the first place, or because they were soldiers, or because they were people. After all, they go stealing food from the farmers there, just right after. They seem mechanized by a degree, but you don't see in them the sense of tiredness or properly of spiritual death that Remarque wanted to point out setting in after so much violence. It all seems like it happened, like there's just 2 episodes of violence that shocked these guys, and they don't even express a coherent idea about the wall, or they don't, the whole process is not understood. Why do you talk about the train of companions? Why do you talk about this bloodthirsty ultra-nationalist commander that sends you to die if you don't want to unload the moral burden on those people rather than what you personally did, right? This is a question that is not explained in the movie, and that, in my opinion, brought all this crowd of cheeringly positive reviews just to, in fact, that's how I wanted to criticize that one, because it's horrifying. That say out loud that the soldiers have no fault, or even if they have it, it's still the fault of the people who sent them to fight. and it's not about them. And so war is just a great lie, whichever war it is, without any distinction, because that's as far as they went. And it's all immoral in the first place, and so there is this great lie for which I don't know. I presume that kids that were leaving for the front in during World War the First, they knew, generally speaking, from their culture, from their family, from what they knew that war is a place where you go to conquer, to kill, to do. You may have not seen how it is until it happens, but it's pretty clear in mind. I think the concept of battle, of the Kampf, if you look at German folklore, it's all even at something that, again, at the time was completely normal. At the time, it was completely normal for any country to go at war, and for the people to say, okay, it's a duty, it's for my country, it's a matter of honor, it's a matter of manhood. We have to do it for the future of our country, because if our country becomes more powerful, we will live better, our families will live better, and fuck you and everybody around you, as long as we can grow. It's still the same thing that the Germans thought at the time of Hitler and the Lebensraum, and most people, I presume, still in the world reason like deep down, right? And that especially these kind of completely superficial and shallow analysis of these movie reviews actually hint at the fact that nobody understood anything from World War I and World War II, which absolutely have nothing to do with demonizing war, which is a mere instrument in the hands of politics, but that should have just brought people to be actual more intelligent and capable human beings, to understand why making war in most of the times is a bad idea, but not all the times, and the entire civilizational deal is trying to understand what the difference lays in, because there is something called moral responsibility, for which, again, it's the ideas, not the means that really matter at the end of the day, which is also a traditional concept. So I think that this movie is a bit of a weasel, morally speaking, because it doesn't show any political face of this people, of the characters. It's just, again, that self-hating officer, the entire problem of the movie, and all the rest was just, I don't know, thinking about the war and waiting to happen, or even the delegation at Compiègne was about, yes, we're making this war now, but we're losing, so let's try to score a decent, condition or something, and that was the only tension behind the thing. I mean, what about the mere rest of the whole thing, right? So, I am very displeased with the shift from Remarque here, because in Remarque you had the adults, so the hierarchy. This was written again from a German who fought in the trenches when he was that young. So what all the system had told you that it was worth doing, and Remarque's take, it was not worth doing. Now, Remarque's work, it's important to stress, was criticized as well, because that was his take on World War I. And of course, it was censored for nationalistic reasons in many countries. In Germany, but the Nazis disliked him because he said it's against civic duty. It's against Germany and the war effort and everything. But there were also later other veterans who said, look, yeah, it was a terrible thing, but there was also a point to it. Remarque, for example, criticized even some, the nuns, the hospitals, the thing. And some people said, but what? I mean, those helped dramatically. There is all it was a war effort also from home. This is valid for every side, right? So it's nothing to do specifically with Germany or anything. But the point being that Remarque said pretty clearly that the teacher was an idiot. Basically, that the father wouldn't understand the son about the monstrosity of what they saw and they did in the trenches, which is a shocking experience that changes you forever, and that Remarque was trying to at least lecture people about, not to think that war is just a child's game. It is something really beyond most of what we can understand. And until we have been there, and even there, it's quite like deep in the mystery of it, in the depths of human soul, or what remains of it after such experience. And so in all this, right, the sense of guilt does not truly emerge as powerfully. It just feels as these guys have to do this. They're just waiting for the end of the war. Practically, there is no other political, moral concern of this all. What happens after the war, we're going to be defeated. There is not even properly that sense of, oh my god, we're defeated. We're fucked, right? All these people have died for nothing. We lost. Now, all the soldiers have legitimately cheer the night before because they say, oh my god, the war is over. Big deal, of course, but it's not ended. There is a malaise. There is a poison. We all know what happened between one war and, in fact, the other that was to come for what happened also during the first and in between. Especially in the case of the Germans, I mean, you're fighting Mijin, you're fighting for your country, and that country is brutally, it basically disintegrates. This is not just a war that is fought in a region far away that you can just be drafted to, but it's terrible, but everything at home remains the way that here, literally the fate of your country is going to be sealed for generations if you don't make something, in fact, also that at some point got to an extremistic end. So it's a massive tragedy. There should be a massive fear of what also the Allies are doing. Are they advancing? Will they keep advancing before the war ends? These guys simply come back to the place around the villa there, the French castle, and they just relax. Apparently, nobody cares about this kind of thing, right? Okay, they're not so all easygoing. You can easily see the distress, the disorder, the chaos, but nothing stems, and nothing in the movie makes you think that this thing stems from a broader historical, political, and moral context about the war as a whole. It's as if these kids were just selfishly, concerned about what happens to them because they've been in the trenches, and not because of what this means for the entire country or society or how the whole thing will see them. This was the huge deal. And this movie doesn't show any of this. So aside from things like airplanes wasting ammo shooting at fleeing Germans, retreating as just mere infantry, or the usual blood vomiting, which often doesn't happen even when you're shot in the legs, this movie, in my opinion, seems to be extremely lazy in delivering a moral message about literally anything that this war entailed. And I'm unfortunately not surprised of this at all. I think there is this simply reflects the tastes of our generation, right? In my opinion, when they make this Netflix things, they look at the next thing, or other movies as well, that trends on YouTube, and they make a movie of it. Such as, I don't know, Americans now are getting fixated with exorcism. Surprise, surprise, there is a movie with Russell Crowe making the Pope's exorcist. This tendency is disturbing because it responds the emotions of people, not the intelligence or the human dignity of people, or of the morality of people, or the reason of people, or the authority of just people who study, for example, World War I for a lifetime, to see this stereotypical depictions at the end of the day. That, again, how many times you have heard on the internet all these crypto Nazis that say, we want a German faction in this video game because actually we want to be the Nazis and leave us alone with our paranoid delusions. It's basically the entire YouTube is based on this. It's based on, also the reviews end up talking about Hitler. They don't end up talking about World War I even though the two things are connected. But it's as if we were talking about World War II, World War I. It gets down to this need for having a German perspective, and it turns out that this movie upset especially the Germans, exactly because they may have a greater sensitivity regarding that particular representation, not necessarily for the best reason, because again, it may stem just for national reasons, but at least they were displeased with this movie, which I think is, at least not by the majority, but still, let's say, this obsession for whatever concerns aestheticism and the idea, we have to hear also the perspective of these others, is all just a major moral scam, an alibi to keep cultivating the same nationalistic and or socialistic delusions that are the same ones that brought, in fact, lesser people to cause things like the Holocaust, and to practically, still make us wonder what's wrong with, obviously, a world that hasn't understood anything from such things, and still thinks that it's cool, after all, to root for whichever faction, just because, I don't know, maybe you like the Hugo Boss fashion and this fake sense of cultural development that you want to attribute it because you don't even know that your historiography did a very specific operation after the world wars to make you think specific things about how the war went for political reasons of the time, of electorate, of reasons of the Cold War, again, legitimate ones, but things that an educated person should at least know. Penalty, not really being able to vote, because I don't want the world to be in the hands of ignorant people, right? And especially that overbearingly express the majority of this uninformed, extremistic, and mentally deluded opinions, right? So this movie may be positive as far as it was made. I don't think that there is anything specifically wrong with. It's just a story like another. I mean, artistically, I give it maybe a 6+ out of 10. I don't really. I can say I'm a fan of this movie. It was a waste of time watching it, quite honestly. But in order to deliver this message, I had to watch it necessarily, and I will be more vocal about this whole thing. The problem is, be very cautious about any implication that any movie has. Because it's very easy to titillate the mindset of emotional teenagers, or again, people that still don't have their prefrontal cortex solidified, into sedimenting again in them the notion that that history is just a big lie, and that everything is relative, and there is nothing to learn historically, because any kind of effort of quality in a personal education is secondary to what you feel, because that's exactly how you're picked and sent in a trench dying, of course without even understanding what is going on, even though you are responsible for it exactly for that reason, because you're just an ignorant idiot that doesn't understand anything. And most kids in World War I were not quite even like that, for that to happen. In relative terms of what needed to be known about that world for make those things happening. And if things happened later, be aware that the seeds of that were already present in the ideologies of those very households that produced these kids. And it was somehow normal, but we had to get another war, right? And that's, that as everything could be avoided. Right. In any case, these things happen for us to remember them, and it would be hopeful to remember them in a moral and scientific way, because history is not a personal opinion; it's just a matter of expertise, and who doesn't have that objectively doesn't even matter as far as subjective opinions really are. And this is what we should be teaching to kids, instead of, again, fueling them in their lunacies. Again, as a history, at least on YouTube, I don't understand why the feed of my on my homepage must be all about Nazism, without myself even looking for that with swastikas everywhere, with the Nazi perspective, because the world seems to have gone crazy with this shit just because they fundamentally don't even understand what it is. They are just characters in movies and video games. The history of it, the core political beliefs, why these are incompatible even with the people who actually, with the cultural background of the people who actually call themselves neo-Nazis, Nazis actually are, it's not understood, it's not out there. They don't understand it anymore. And this is very, 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 very risky. Right. Alright, long video for today. Just stop it here. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.